Thanks for landing on our podcast, where we use the power of our collective stories to make change in the world by expanding our understanding of who we are and how we learn.
We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ever-changing topics related to education.
My name is Lisa Johnson Davis, and I am a counselor focusing on how we learn.
And my name is Gabriela Baeza Delgado. I am a counselor interested in maximizing our collective ideas to support all students.
So welcome to the inaugural Two Counselors and a Mic. My name is Lisa Davis.
And I am Gabriela Delgado.
And we work for the San Diego County Office of Education and Expanded Learning Programs.
And grants. And I'm happy to be part of the Student Services and Programs Division.
So we decided that, with all of this going on, we're just going to try to foray into a space that's really we're not necessarily comfortable with. But, that's all part of kind of being in this COVID world right now, is that, we're really challenging ourselves and we're challenging others. We hope through this podcast that we'll be able to, think things through differently and start with kind of listening to the stories of where we all come from. And that often gets overlooked when we think about school and seat time and learning lessons. We come from a completely different space, which is student services. And that is really looking at services that support our students at the County Office of Ed. And so what we thought we would do is just maybe describe a little bit of our background first. And hopefully that will spur some further dialogue as well too. So Gabby, do you want to just kind of start and talk about, kind of where you came from all those years ago to get to where you are as a counselor and somebody who's working in student services?
So for me, I have a journey of again, very similar to other students. I was not born here. I was born across the border in Tijuana many, many moons ago. And so I grew up my weekends in TJ, and as a baby, really I think it was like maybe 6 months, I became a permanent resident, and I had a permanent resident card for many, many years of my life until I became a citizen. That didn't happen until I was in college. But I grew up in bilingual classrooms in elementary, not knowing that they were bilingual classrooms. I just knew that I had teachers that spoke Spanish part of the day, and then English was the rest of the day. But at home it was Spanish only. My parents, my dad, before he passed, very limited English, picked up what he needed to for work. My mom, very, very little. So I lived in that world of, I picked up English quickly and well because we would watch TV and listen to music in English, and all my teachers and friends were all speaking it. But at home I would go home and it was just Spanish only. So that was helpful in the developing, my language skills as a true bilingual student. But again, like I said, I didn't know I was any different. I didn't realize that they had separate classes back in the day for just bilingual students. So anyway, that's how I started. Grew up in Imperial Beach, California. So I'm proud to be a South County resident for many years. And I am the baby of 4 girls. My poor dad, I think, always wanted a boy because he was a big time soccer player on the weekend and soccer fan, but didn't get that. He had 4 girls, only one of whom enjoyed playing soccer. But I'm like many of the kids, like I said, I've served. So I'm local. I think I'm local, although I wasn't born here. Most of my upbringing was in San Diego. And I went to San Diego State and Point Loma Nazarene. And I've had a lot of varied experiences, but I'm proud to say that that I'm from San Diego and grew up here and have family here. And I've had roots here my whole life. I know a lot of people are transplants and they come from the East Coast because they want our amazing weather. I had the opportunity to move away for college. I did not, didn't have the finances to do that. And I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did for me, to say, nope, I'm actually happy that I got to stay here and grow up here and know San Diego really well. So that's a little bit of who I am. Dr. D, why
Cool.
don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, for those who might be listening elsewhere around the nation, or who knows, internationally, we are coming to you from San Diego, San Diego County Office of Ed. But San Diego is a pretty broad space, and it's very diverse. So, just to contextualize, we in expanded learning at the county office, we manage all of these after-school, before and after-school programs. So just to kind of give some context real quick, if anybody was wondering where we're coming from. But I think it's interesting. I have kind of a similar story in some ways. I don't have 4 sisters, because I think that would have been amazing to have sisters. I do have a sister and a brother. But my family was actually this weird thing that probably nobody really knows outside of San Diego, which is California, which just means that when the Spanish came over to Baja California, and they started to kind of seed the missions, if anybody knows the whole idea of this kind of missions across our wonderful state. The people came through, and then they kind of populated different areas, like in Los Angeles and San Diego. So these were little towns. There weren't anything big, but I have my roots kind of like in San Diego from kind of that aspect. But I am multiracial. So I have this whole other kind of like Midwest background to my family. My dad came from Illinois. His parents came from kind of his heritage is he's Welsh and also English. And then here he meets my wonderful mom in San Diego, because he goes to a local school, and that's all she wrote. So I grew up kind of not really knowing who I was. I didn't really understand these cultural components at all. It was really not something that I thought about. So I got to college, and again, like you, Gabby, I couldn't leave. I actually did get away for 1 year, which I think was really important, and we'll talk about it, like being first gen. But I got away for a year, and then the draw of family, especially for Hispanic cultures, it's just part of who we are, I think. And so I had to come back and help my mom. And so I went to the University of San Diego, and was fortunate to get into grad school pretty young, but I had to decide, should I be a teacher or a counselor? It was like one of the hardest decisions that I made. And it was just at that time that my younger sister had a really bad experience in high school, where she couldn't get a college application, and she was told she wasn't college material. Like, she was just straight out told that. And I said, okay, I'm becoming a counselor. And I never looked back. And I think I'm glad. I feel like the best teachers are the best counselors, and the best counselors are the best teachers. So I'm not trying to set that divide up at all. But it's just very interesting how that divide is kind of set for us, even in the way that those structures are put in place. Mm-hmm. So I think I'd love to hear your perspective of, I think we've both kind of been trying to meld like the student services and have its voice, like almost like student voice, the voice of student services as a part of a system, even be heard a little bit more. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
I actually thought I would be in law enforcement. And I think it's because I grew up watching cop shows that, just seem like you're out there and you're saving, you're helping good people, and it seemed exciting. And I like learning about the law. But when I remember going to San Diego State, I thought, wow, this is everything about what's wrong with people and why they end up in the system. And so then I quickly learned I would rather be on the preventative end. And I want to understand what causes people to end up in systems, especially in the criminal justice system. But I want to be on the other side of helping them not get there, or if I could be a disruptor some way. And so I think that's what student services is. So when I think about how do you describe student services, it's hard sometimes for some people to understand, our work is that heart work. it's you're there helping kids find resources, whether that's finding their next meal, whether that's finding an apartment to live in because they're on their own and they're aging out of the foster care system, whether it's getting them a college application. It's all of that, the social emotional supports, all kind of wrapped into one. And I think more and more, especially the climate that we're in, and having conversations finally around mental health and the importance of self-care and things along those lines. I think people are finally understanding a little bit of what it's like to be in the student services world, to say, yeah, we do all of the non-academic based instruction and support, but everything we do supports and prepares that child to be that better student, to be at a place where they can engage in instruction. So in the beginning, when I first started out, of course we're data driven, as we should all be, but it's interesting when you say, well, how can you really prove that a prevention program that you're running in the out of school time hours really works? And I struggled with that in a lot of my programs, because I would have students for about a semester at a time, and we would do counseling groups, whether it was on self-esteem or decision-making, et cetera. And it would be hard for me in that short time to show a significant impact in grades, or in their GPA, but I could always show an increase in whether or not that student was connecting to somebody at a deeper level. I would measure whether or not I was connecting with students, if they, especially for the girls I served, they would come in with a positive attitude. I worked with many that would come in just really angry at the world. And so for us, the way that we measure the impact, again, that heart work is very different. Having a kid say, I feel like I could come out to my parents because I could talk to you.
Yeah.
How do you measure that? How do you measure that when it's not going to show up in their GPA? But you think that kid needed that support and needed to know that, we're here for you no matter what the journey involves. And so I think sometimes people have a hard time understanding that about the student services field, but it really is about, we're trying to really provide those holistic approaches to students, because without that, they are not going to be at a place to learn from a teacher that spent so much time on their lesson planning. They won't be ready to take in any of that until we deal with what's happening. So I don't know if I answered your question, but kind of went on about that.
No,
bit.
Totally. I love how you said that too, because we there's the terms that we have in counseling, and sometimes it gets it bleeds out into just the academic realm, and it's kind of like, whole child, looking at the holistic, and when you said that, it just immediately grounds me in this idea of complex systems and that work. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But when I was growing up, I think it's a blessing, but I had this ability to be able to really try to connect things. And so whenever I was in school and I didn't have the why, I didn't have that context, it would drive me insane. And I just felt like I could never, I never knew the whole. And it's interesting because we are coming from such a siloed place where we differentiate instruction, and we have disciplines, and we have student services is one kind of system, and then teaching is another kind of system. We have credentials for each one, and they're separate. And I feel like now, as we're moving forward, there's this blending of the two, and there's not necessarily an understanding of what our kind of our unique roles are. We kind of understand, I think, teaching in general. I don't think maybe parents and people that aren't in education understand the really unique pressures that teachers have for performance. And, I think that would be a great podcast to get some teachers on and really talk about, like, how do we look at what you just said? How do I look at the emotional growth of a child that doesn't show up in the GPA? And for a teacher, it's like that doesn't even come into play. And then we're not even really assessing that anyhow. We're not looking at it. We're not really measuring it. And in the student services side as much as we could. And then sometimes the measurements take on like very quantitative numbers, and it's not hearing the stories at all. And I think that's why we're doing this podcast, is because there's a lot of talk about career pathways. There's a lot of talk about equity. We have a lot of these things going on in the world right now, and we know that we need to change. I think fundamentally, like we can feel it in our gut that we need to change. But it's like, how do you change that if you don't know where people come from?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this podcast is going to be a way for us to showcase kind of where our backstories come from, not in a way that we're saying, listen to us, you don't understand where we're coming from. It's more of like, let's all understand where each other are coming from, because frankly, if for first generations, for example, and we could talk a little bit about that, like, if you're not a first generation college grad, and if you've had the luxury, like my children have now had the luxury of having a college grad in their life, that is a different world.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a teacher or a counselor or a parent or an employer,
mm-hmm.
These are just the variances that make us all such dynamic systems.
It's that lens from which you approach your work, or maybe approach a relationship with a certain student or a parent, or even your colleagues, right? When you're coming from that perspective of knowing that we are the way that we are, good, bad, or indifferent, because of the journeys that we've all lived. But if we continue to ignore and just say, well, I don't need to really, that's like a piece of the puzzle that I know is there, but I don't need to see it. Mm-hmm. We miss the mark. And oftentimes I think that we've done that with students all too often. You think that's why oftentimes we're, any kind of behavior you see, it's indicative of some type of need that the child wants, right? It happens from when they're babies. It happens up to when, we see them in middle school, high school, graduate students, et cetera. They're exhibiting some type of need that they're wanting. And if they're not heard, it can be extremely frustrating. And the way that it might be expressed is going to be different from one child versus another. But we're no different. The behaviors that we see with adults, clearly, if you turn on the news or on any social media outlet, you'll see, wow, there's clearly some behaviors here that are being expressed by people who have some hurt, have some baggage of their own, and hasn't really ever been addressed, acknowledged, hasn't been maybe validated. And so then it spews oftentimes in some very, what can be destructive, unhealthy ways, hurtful ways. So I think that's a really good place for us to start, even just, with our own department, is just finding out who we are, why are we connected to this work, how are we connected to the work that we do, and how does that make us better employees and better managers and better teachers, better counselors, because we have to be able to leverage that. And I think counselors by default have an advantage in that part of our coursework is to do that. And now I've met plenty of counselors who would much rather work on the academic pieces than ever touch the social emotional. I was the opposite. My training and experiences have actually only been in the social emotional support realm. Very few of my experiences in counseling were to prepare students for college, filling out the FAFSA, things like that. That really was not the road that I took, and that was by design, by my own by myself, because I didn't want to do that type of work. I felt like, well, no, truly, I wanted to do the real counseling type work. But unfortunately, as you know, Lisa, in a lot of our schools in California is similar to a lot of other states in this respect, that we go through counseling programs and that doesn't necessarily prepare us. And then when we're in the field, we are bombarded with the academic heavy pieces of, needing kids to perform, which we know we want them to be successful, but then it doesn't leave a whole lot of space for the social emotional pieces that are oftentimes at the root of what we see. But I think now, like we said earlier, it's starting to shift, and we need to balance that approach, because it clearly is not working for a lot of our students. And so we need to create systems in which we are able to really then look, like we said, either holistically or as a whole, we're looking at a child, not just from one lens. But I do think it starts with that foundation of understanding stories. And it comes with listening. When I've taught at the graduate level, I've told students, you know what your best tool is going to be as a counselor? That you learn when to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
That is
Absolutely.
the best tool. And that's not in your book.
Nope.
But that you have to bite your tongue. You're there to listen first and foremost. You speak after that kid is done or the parent is done. Like, but oftentimes we are listening and we already want to solve the problem because we think, oh, I got to go on, have 3 other meetings today. Like I don't have time. Let me just tell you what you need to do. And so then, that's the challenge, right? It's like you actually have to listen intently, and that's harder than it sounds, believe it or not, because often as we think we know it all. And a lot of times, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, but we go into fields thinking, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I've met plenty of counselors. I'm like, oh, you think you're the most amazing counselor because you have a credential. That doesn't make you the counselor. The degrees don't, that gives you a lot of background, theoretical knowledge, all great foundation.
Yes.
But until you're in there with students,
Right.
that's where you get the true preparation, and the real education is when you're there in a moment of crisis with a kid, and you've got to figure out what the heck do I say, or what's the right thing to say, and all of that. So, but I do think it all starts with the stories of finding out who we are, how we're connected to our work. So, I'm curious for you, we're both in the expanded learning program. Sometimes, things are put in our path for particular reasons. How did you end up in expanded learning? I'm real curious how your journey landed you serving out of school time programs.
Yeah, so I had the fortune, it really did change my life in many ways, but I had the fortune of working with a very innovative charter school here in San Diego that's very out of the box. And I had a colleague, or actually a friend who was in high school, who was the dean of that school when it started. And my oldest daughter, was in the first class. So I really didn't, I was doing some educational writing and more like accreditation and fun law, like, and compliance stuff. And then, my daughter joined the school, and it was just amazing to me. And I feel like I evolved as a person as my daughter was going through the school. And if you ask her, she's like, it was okay. But for me, I was like, wow, because it was so different than what I had been exposed to. And that there was a specific vision and mission that all kids were going to be able to go to college. And that really appealed to me, because I always felt like in my own situation, both of my parents did not go to college. I was the first graduate on both sides of my family. And I think they wanted to push me, but they honestly, I don't think that they really thought I was going to go. When it was, I heard a student the other day say that it was the hardest thing for him during COVID was to have his parents do the FAFSA, because they wouldn't do the FAFSA, which is what you need to get student loans. And I was like, I was right there, buddy. I understand that so well, because my mom thought, I'm not giving anybody my taxes. So, at this school, with just that kind of mantra, and then seeing the delivery, but also seeing the collegiality of the staff, the teachers working together with all of the support staff to really support that social emotional piece. The students were different. They called their teachers by their first name. They were very, very respectful, though. I mean, and I would call students who now are almost 10 years out from that first graduating class. I would say they were my young colleagues, even when they were in 9th grade, because I knew that, they're going to come out and they're going to be working with me in the field at some point. So I think as I was working, I got hired really shortly after, and spent about 9.5 years there. And probably after that first year, I got the opportunity to take on after school programs, which we call expanded learning, for those of you guys that don't know. And that has traditionally kind of been like childcare, supervision. We want to make sure that kids are, safe 6 to 6. You probably heard those buzzwords. But as we started kind of developing the program, and the more and more that the kids had voice and choice, I really began to see that it was a deal changer when it came to social capital. So for those students who live in areas where they don't have access to networks their parents really don't know anybody, that by having these programs in robotics or rowing, I mean, in San Diego, like that's a very affluent sport. You would never see that elsewhere. So some of these opportunities, it really closed that gap. Did we need to do more as a school? Because we got a lot of kids in college, but then the support, I think, kind of fell down out the waist. That to me was why I became obsessed with expanded learning, because I didn't feel like you could get as many opportunities available to you in such like a compacted manner. And then just being after school with the kids, that was where I truly wanted to be a counselor. That was my calling. They would come in, we would be like a family, we would talk through problems. And, I don't know if a lot of people really think about teenagers, because that's a whole nother podcast, Gabby. But our teens today, are just, I will say, science will eventually show that their brains have developed extensively with the technology use. A lot of people say that it's bad, but I feel like it's like the new cave wall is what I call it. That like we put our handprints on the wall. The kids are using Instagram, TikTok to get their thoughts on this communal wall, and they're brilliant. They're just brilliant. So we're really not maximizing too all of the brilliance that they have, especially as they are going through adolescence. So, that's now kind of my passion. And we have the fortune to be these counselors in this expanded learning field that touches on, like you were saying, foster, migrant students, homeless students, and then just our marginalized students who don't get opportunities that, high school might say they have opportunities, but you and I both know, maybe we talk a little bit about that. It's not easy to take advantage of those opportunities in high school. Like, did you do that?
I had it was a blessing to have 3 older sisters. So when they had already, and I'm the youngest, so there's a 9-year gap between myself and the oldest. So, she probably had it extremely difficult because she had to figure it out all by herself. I got to watch the 3 of them go before me and say, oh, okay, they've figured out some of these things. I now know a little bit more. So I wasn't going in blind to a lot of things, but, it's difficult sometimes when people say, well, these programs, they change lives. Absolutely. They change lives. And, the whole premise behind having these out of school time experiences for students is that the core day is filled and it's already maxed out. You have very limited time, and you've got strong rigor, and there's just a lot happening in that day. And the out of school time is this really unique space for students to just be themselves and not worry about performing, and not worry about, oh my gosh, am I gonna get this art activity? Am I going to get an A? It's not about that. It's really more about your personal growth and journey. So when you take that pressure away from students, I think that they just feel like, oh, I can breathe and I can just come here and chill and come here and learn and have fun and be interactive. And they don't even realize you're actually learning a lot. It's just camouflaged. And I didn't stick learning in the title of the activity. You learn to be sneaky that way with them, and they don't even realize how much they're actually getting from it. And when I think back in my own experience, I think, I got a lot from the amazing teachers that I did have, but I got just as much, if not more, from the out of school experiences that I had. And that came from sports that I played, to all of the coaches that I connected with, just those experiences, especially from a kid growing up. For me, again, growing up with very limited resources, I didn't have a chance to play any club sport. That I didn't know what that was until much later. I thought, wait a minute, you pay to play? Why? It's free at school if you can have a 2.0 and you make the team, right? And so I just came from a very different place of, oh, I'm going to definitely tap into what I have that's available, that is free of charge, because I would be silly to not take advantage of it. And whether that was clubs, whether that was, service learning experiences or opportunities that came my way, I was that kid that I tried really hard to stay active and be social that way, because I knew that was my ticket out. If I sat back and just, pull the basic kind of, B, C average, I thought, that's not going to cut it for somebody like me. And I learned that very early on. I thought, I've got to work hard. I want to play sports because it's going to look good on applications. It's good for me. I want to be in student government. So I started to pick that up really quickly, because again, like I said, I had 3 older sisters that had done it. And so I knew, I need to do that. And then maybe even more. And so out of school time, opportunities that came my way, I try to really snag them. And, truthfully, even getting through high school towards the end, I thought, well, I did a lot. And sometimes that's a problem we have, where kids do too much and they don't have enough downtime. But it was helpful for me because it gave me experiences that I would have never been able to have because we couldn't afford them. I was never going to have the chance to play tennis. That's what I played, and I played basketball and tennis. And I loved those 2 sports, but I would have never had an opportunity to play tennis with a private coach like that.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Like we didn't have that.
What's that?
We didn't have that, So I just think we're in that unique space to be able to really take advantage and highlight how it's changed our lives. And I think that's what, truthfully, it makes us better educators, because we've been in a lot of the shoes of those students. And even if you haven't had the exact same experience, I've worked with students, who have very, very challenging backgrounds that I couldn't even relate to or fathom. And they know that you maybe didn't have it perfect, but they also know, I had kids straight out tell me, my maiden name is Baeza. And they'd say, Ms. Baeza, we know you, like, you've never been in a gang. I'm like, no, you can tell. No, I have not. They say, you look like you never once did something bad. I'm like, well, not perfect, but I had role models. I had people that were watching, and I was deathly afraid of my mom.
Oh,
I was like, no. So I knew what to say, but I think it does, like I was saying, it makes us better educators, because we can connect and students feel it off the bat. So
yes,
for some of us, we don't have to work as hard to build that rapport. When you have no connection to where these kids, you have to work harder, and you'll get there, because kids will open up to you if you're authentic and you're real and you show up. They will.
Oh, absolutely.
But it does give us that advantage, when kids say, what, you grew up, like, you're from the neighborhood? Like, yeah. And I know exactly what we're talking about. I know what that means, then they realize, okay, you're pretty real. And that, I think, has been helpful, is that I got to participate as I grew up going to the Boys and Girls Club, and my mom knew that's a free service. Why would we not take advantage? I just think it's nice when we're able to bring those pieces of ourselves into our work. And, we don't forget the journey. We don't forget how far we've come, because it's always important, I think, when you bring that level of authenticity, because kids, it's one thing I learned, they will see right through you. They will see, they'll call you, they'll just tell you to your face.
Yep.
You're full of it. And again, it's just acknowledging and being okay with what your journey has been. Say, I'm proud to say that I wasn't, the ideal student. I didn't have that experience. I bombed my SATs. I had a very difficult time. There were things on that test that I thought, I have no idea what they're talking about. I'd never done traveling. We didn't do that as a kid. There were references and things that didn't make sense to me. And so I think, but who cares? That doesn't mean that you're going to be stuck. That just means you got to find another way, and that's one thing I will say, is that out of school time does for our kids, is you show them a different way. You show them a different way to learn, show them a different way to be critical thinkers, show them a different way to express emotions. That's what we do. It's the alternative. Like, just look at it from a different lens. So I am happy to be with the learning team now. Didn't think I'd end up here. It's not where I thought I was going to be, but sometimes things just happen. But I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to be a part of it, because it is, I think we're in a unique space now where it's shifting. Expanded learning is shifting. And we'd be silly to sit back and just let it happen before our eyes. I want to be in it and work alongside other people that are having amazing creative ideas and say, remember when we used to do it differently? Oh my gosh, that's so archaic.
Oh,
Like,
remember
what?
in the old days when we,
Yeah,
oh my gosh, wouldn't that be awesome? One day we're going to say that.
I know.
No, and I guess when we have colleagues, and I know, I've been in situations where people will say, I don't have your experience. I did come from a sense of privilege, and I recognize my privilege. And we have a lot of different like privilege walks and exercises to show people, like how many of you have a college degree, how many of you don't have somebody who was incarcerated, and so these are kind of like a ranking, and then you can be in front of, a line of people that had different experiences than you. And I had somebody come up to me in a conference after she was definitely at the beginning of the line. I mean, she was very far out there. And she said, okay, I recognize that. I do have a sense of privilege. What do I do now? And part of what my work is this idea that we all have what I call provenance. And if anybody's familiar, like with artwork, in order to sell that piece of art for $1 million, it has to have a provenance. So you need to know, okay, this is who owned it. And yes, I can trace it back kind of to the artist. And so it's valuable. That, to me, our stories are valuable in this provenance process. That's what we're saying is kind of go through. As counselors, we're fortunate because we can do that. We have to go through some level of counseling, and we have to learn about ourselves. And I always say I'm like a better mom. I'm such a better mom than my parents, God rest their souls. I did not have to corporally punish my children because I learned other alternatives to the way that I had grown up, where, that wasn't not spare the rod, spoil the child thing. And so that provenance process then helps you, especially if you do have experience that isn't the same as your kids that you're teaching or you're counseling. If you find it hard to be able to even reflect, because you use that word, Gabby, like if, as counselors, that's like, I don't know, it's ingrained into us. So we're constantly reflecting too much, and so we have to that's our basement we have to get out of. But if you have a story and you start telling your stories, and then you have your kids tell their stories,
so powerful.
Then, and maybe that segues a little bit to like what we've run at the accounting office in our expanded learning is this thing called strengths-based leadership that you're aware of. And that's exactly what it is. It's just a matter of bringing people together that are adults and kids and sharing stories and finding commonalities. It's not pointing fingers to say like, wow, you have it really bad and I don't, and I don't get where you're coming from. And we've had kind of self-policing in some of those where some teachers might say, well, yeah, I got that you have a family that has some domestic violence. I understand that you're homeless. But at the end of the day, you need to perform in school. And we've had that happen where, that conversation has kind of been striking. The majority, I think, of teachers and support staff are like, huh? I didn't even know that my own peers might think that way, because of course this student has something different. So, I wonder then, like when you think back about just your experiences, like you said, growing up low income and, being a first gen, like how would high school have been different for you if it would have supported you in the way that you could have grown? Or did it, I guess I'm using it as a negative, how did it support you? Or what were there things now that you look back that it could have done for you with your specific background?
For me, in school, I was lucky in that I had teachers that recognized that I had talent. And I think had I not had these teachers, I could have just been like a lot of students where it's like, they're just kind of making their going through the motions. But I had teachers, and Mr. Daly's one of them. He actually just finally retired.
Oh my gosh.
I think we were his first or second class.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember he was a very tough teacher. I mean, academically, he pushed us. He would not tolerate anybody, misbehaving in the class. And so he ran a pretty tight ship. But I remember there was one activity that he just kind of pushed me. I had never asked for it, but he said, "Oh, there's going to be this debate club. And you have to be a part of it. Not like, do you want to?" It was like, you're going to be great. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I think because I probably like to talk. And so he just kind of, I'll never forget, because this was different. I had to ask my mom for permission. I said, "Oh, the teacher's going to drive me and a couple other students to Emory School, which is another school in our district." And she said, "Well, what school and who's driving you? Why is the teacher putting you in his car?" And I'm like, "Oh, because the principal and the teacher are going to drive the group of students." And I remember that vividly, because I thought I would have never just signed up for debate speech class or activity. I would have never done that on my own as a sixth grader. But he just, like I said, kind of pushed. And that one event, I thought, oh, that was a really cool thing to do. That, again, somebody just saw something in me and nurtured it.
Yeah.
And, the rest is history, right? So
Yes.
If Mr. Daly is listening now in his retirement, he can just say like, "Oh, of course, that's me, because I'm so amazing." He's kind of funny that way. But I think, I was fortunate. I was not one of the students, like many of my peers, unfortunately, that didn't, I was seen in a lot of my classes, and a lot of my peers, I don't think were, because they didn't either speak up for themselves, or they, like I said, kind of blended into the background, or they were standing out for the wrong reason. So I did have friends where I'm like, "Dude, you're going down this path of getting high." And I was a square.
Yeah.
"Oh, no. I'm gonna get in trouble. I can't do
my
that."
My mom is gonna kill me.
Oh, she'd come for me. She sure would. And so I think, again, I was blessed in that respect, because I did have teachers that recognized, oh, and I know we were just categorized that way. Well, you're the college-bound kids.
Yes.
You're going to be fine, because we were put, in honors classes, in AP classes. So we were already on that track to succeed, and we were treated that way. You play sports, you're in clubs and government. And the other kids, where I thought, well, you're kind of like in the regular activities, where they weren't necessarily, I think, given the same opportunities for whatever reason. And so I ended up really feeling a sense of obligation to serve, because all the kids that I served when I was providing direct services through all my programming were the kids that we could see, if there is not a positive role model or some type of intervention, statistically, I know what's going to happen. And remember, I told you, I thought I'd be a cop. Well, not necessarily a cop. I thought FBI, because I thought that was cooler. But so I already learned, like, oh my gosh, they have all these risk factors that are just there. And if they're not, connecting to something that's positive, there's a higher chance that this kid could engage in some negative behaviors. And so that's where I always came from, is being able to provide those supports, because I was a lucky kid in that sense, that I had a lot of things stacked up against me, right? Staying low income, not from this country. There's some addiction in the family, all of these things that were there, but school was always a good, positive experience for me, for the most part. Yeah. Especially with my interactions with teachers, because they saw me. And that, I think, that's the difference. If there's so many of our students that you've served in all your programs too, Lisa, you know this, that you might be the first person that really sees them. And I mean, that just, I think of all the girls that I've served in my groups, and, they'd come to group and nobody acknowledges them the whole day. Yeah. The whole day. And it breaks my heart to think, gosh, it doesn't take much to see people and validate them as human beings. And even if, my God, just say hello to them, just smile, and doesn't mean they're going to say hello and wave, back to you, especially in middle school, because they're, they hate everyone. But don't take it personal, because I always think, my gosh, that kid, there's a lot going on that we don't see. And what you only see is what surfaces, right? What bubbles to the top. You do not see everything that's underneath. And so that's where I think we come in, right? To really be that advocate for students, because I think I had those advocates. Again, I credit Mr. Daly with a lot, because I don't know what made him think that I could be in this speech class, but the minute that happened, I loved it. I ended up doing a lot of student government and, in middle school and high school, because I just thought it was cool to present ideas and be a representative. I just, my confidence really built from that as a kid. And then here I am doing a podcast with you again, thinking people are going to want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I think that you probably, for people who are listening who are first gen, I think that's the common experience, is that we were seen because maybe we were in GATE, or we were in honors, or we were in something. But for those who don't have that experience, it's a real struggle. I mean, my mom was a hairdresser. My dad was the proverbial milkman. So, firmly working class, did not have this range of experiences. Had it not been when I was in kindergarten, I started doing the work, and the teacher talked to my mom, said, you need to give this child books. This child just needs to read. And my mom, to her credit, not knowing, that's the thing, is we come from a place where our parents don't know. They don't have those experiences. My grandfather, was basically a farm worker and a caretaker in his later part of the years. He did not have an education. He didn't probably even go to school. I mean, I don't know, but he went to the School of Hard Knocks. So nobody told my mom. My mom, always told me the story of how she didn't know what she was going to do after she graduated from high school. And she just happened to be walking by like a training center for hairdressers, walked in and said, do you have any scholarships? Because that's just the way my mom was. And the lady said no. And then her and her girlfriend walked out, thinking, okay, well, we thought we'd ask. And then lady called them back and said, hey, would you do a cleaning and swap for a scholarship or, tuition? And they're like, absolutely. So my mom hadn't done that. I don't know where we would have been as a family, because during different times of the recessions and losing jobs and things like that, that was always kind of like the bread and butter of our family. So here she listens to this teacher. She's humble. She just wants to know. She starts buying me encyclopedias, tell me why books. Some of these things I have them, and they're like these precursors to computers. It's really interesting. Yeah. And then when I was growing up, you had, Mr. Rogers, and you had Electric Company, and you had Sesame Street that were coming. So it's just like voracious knowledge. But it wasn't, I never thought I'd go to college, never talked about it until I was in 10th grade, when I had my teacher, Dr. Flores, was a man of color. And he said, you know what, you need to go to college. Huh? What are you talking about? He's like, you need to go to college. The irony is that, he was an English professor and I love to read. So I think that's why we connected, but I was really good in physics. I excelled in everything physics. Nobody ever told me like, you should go to college and in physics. And I don't know if that's because I was a woman or what, in that time, but I feel like now, interestingly, as we get through these podcasts, that's really where I've kind of centered is in complexity theory and the complex human adaptive system. And so it's just ironic, but if not for the grace of, Dr. Flores, who's not with us and passed away, he went to my 16th birthday party, Abby. My mom invited him. He gave me a book for Charles Dickens. I hadn't really read any Charles Dickens. I don't even think I read that book. I'm sorry, Dr. Flores. But I mean, a teacher that went to my birthday party. And, we're doing this survey right now that we'll also release shortly. And a lot of our kids in San Diego who are working with virtual learning and working with teachers in a different way, I have to tell you, my colleagues, it's all about you being seen by them.
Oh yeah.
And the conversation.
The connection.
Yeah, the connection. They're just commenting on the fact.
You just want to know that you care.
Absolutely.
Especially during this COVID time.
Yep.
I was so touched when I I think you and I might have been in a meeting one day and I said, we don't live that far from each other, but you had said, there's all this honking going on. And I was like, well,
Uh-huh.
I don't hear anything. But then you said, oh my gosh, I think I told you, I actually looked it up in the neighborhood app, and it was saying that it was teachers that got in their vehicles and were driving around the neighborhood to say hello to their kids. And that's, now it's become a thing, but that was really like within maybe the first, maybe 3 weeks of when we all shut down. And so I just thought, oh my gosh, these teachers who just miss their kids, they just miss seeing them, and the kids miss seeing them.
Yes.
And it just really speaks to that I think that's what I know all the teachers that I connected with, it's if you have a positive relationship the way I did with them, I learned better. Because I could feel they care about what they're doing. They care about their job. They care that I actually get this this section because it's important, even
Yes.
though, so I was able to just appreciate them from that perspective, because I felt like you could tell when it was genuine. And I think, that doesn't change over time as much as our kids have changed with technology, and technology's changed our lives. The connection that we need to feel as people remains constant.
Yes.
And no matter how much we continue to evolve, no matter how much longer we're going to be, living in semi-quarantine phases, the need to connect with people remains. And that, time and time again is what's proven to make a difference in people's lives. And so I think for a lot of us, it's, connecting with each other. And maybe it's COVID's changed a lot of how we do our work and how we connect. And, we've talked about this before, but not saying social distancing, saying it's physical distance,
Yes.
right? Still being social, right? But we
Right.
physically can't necessarily be in the same space or too close. But I think it just always boils down to that, is the relationship. Even when I've had some difficult cases where I thought, oh my gosh, these students have a lot going on. How am I ever what can I possibly do? Get better? And it can be overwhelming for a counselor and a teacher, I think, when you think, oh my gosh, all these odds are stacked up against this kid. What could I possibly do? And then I just would realize you don't have to solve any of their problems. That's not your job. Your job is just there to be a support person and be real and offer kindness and love and support. And that may not seem like a lot when a kid is going through possibly getting pulled from their home, or they're entrenched in a gang, they're documented as a gang member, but you're not there to fix that. You're there to be that support person, and again, one more person on their journey. But to have it be a positive light, I think that's because we all have those hard days where you think, oh, it's too much, I'm always swimming upstream. And I just learned that along the way, that we're not going to fix all the things that are going on, but one thing that I can control is how I'm going to interact with that youth. And while I'm here, I'm not going to be disrespectful or talking down to them. And as much as I would be irritated at times when I'm like, just show up to class, like, why is that so hard? And then you realize, oh my good, and so it's just, there's always that accountability piece with our kids, but it's just strengthening those ties. And I think COVID right now has really shown people have struggled. I think a lot of our students have struggled for that. They don't realize how much they were craving that connection.
Yes.
They're probably sick of seeing their family members for sure.
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know.
Maybe not. Oh, maybe not.
Because so many of them are saying they're reconnecting with their families, or they're reconnecting with their siblings. They've used that term, reconnecting. Yeah.
So I think it just proves, right, that you can't really get away from the basics. And that, is what student services is about. It's the basics for go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's pretty basic, right? That's like your 101 intro to, you have to understand what people need to just function. Yeah. And if we start there, it's okay, how are we as a system giving kids what they need to function and thrive? Are we? As opposed to looking at it kind of the way I think we have for a long time is, well, here's everything that they need to be successful. Well, by who's determining that? Who told you that it's that curriculum that's going to be the most useful? Who said that? Or who said that the setup of the classroom this way is the most effective? And when we have systems built on 100-year-plus-year-old education system, you think, the times now, I think we're going to see those changes, but I hope that the one area we continue to really strengthen is that connections piece between adults and then adults with kids, to then say it's about understanding those stories, those journeys, and then have that be a building block for a stronger collaborative relationship with that young person, because you'll get more. They will want to perform and do better when they feel like you understand them.
Yeah.
Not every single component of who makes them, how they're made up as a person, but even if you just have a little bit of understanding, I think people are appreciative of that.
Well, you went there. You said the 100-year-old system. So.
I did.
Yay, deconstruct some systems. That, I think what you just said, and even if we peel the onion a little bit more and go through some layers, like I always think, and having had the extreme privilege of raising children myself, that you have this child, this baby. It doesn't have income. It doesn't know what it's going to be when it grows up. It's just a baby. And it needs to have this social piece to be able to thrive. There's lots of studies around that. And if that baby doesn't have that, then it actually just fails to thrive. So I think that is the grounding of absolutely what you said. We forget because we think that we learn kind of individually, and people would argue, and I've had people argue, no, I do learn individually. I would actually argue with you. If you were by yourself on an island as an infant, you're not going to survive. So there. But, as you grow, we're bouncing who we are, our personalities, off of each other. And it's the diversity of those experiences that allows us to develop into, these magical creatures, I think, that human beings are. But if we could, as educators, as, people that are in government and corporations, and kind of to take away the 100-year thought process around the educational system as it is, and how we were trying to kind of develop ourselves to be workers, to be honest with you, or to be in careers and things. I feel like if we go back to those roots and we really fostered the connection, that is going to happen, because people want to move toward growth. They want to, we learn whether we want to or not. The school of hard knocks, or, things that happen that are great. We're learning from those experiences. So if we are able to, you said that, put the building blocks in place to have those really deep connections early on in life, because some families don't have those. And so if you come from a family where you're not connecting with anybody, but you connect with a teacher, that can change your life. And what we're looking at, and this, I go back to my physics geeking out about complexity, is what you're looking at is human beings are emergent systems. We emerge as something. You and I, we emerged as something that we would have never known, and we can't be predicted. So even if, I might have struggled and things happened in my life, or I didn't get that one connection with that teacher, I ended up getting another connection when I went to college. And, Dr. Dempsey, Joanne Dempsey, who I named my daughter after, when I was in college, she was the next person that helped propel me. So I emerged from all of these interactions with people, the social aspect. Michael Tomasello, a wonderful person at Duke, he has his own lab, talks about why we cooperate, why we collaborate. And it's just inherently part of our human culture to transfer what we know to the next generation. I would argue, are we doing that? Or are we just kind of looking at 1 + 1 = 2? Go through K through 12, take the SAT, go to college, get a career. Or are we saying this child is an amazing mathematician, he's doing gobbledygook, I don't know what it means, but I'm going to see if I can nurture that when he's 7 years old, because maybe he's the most amazing, theorist ever born. We'll never know that in the structure we have now. Yeah. How did you feel what were your building blocks to you emerging as the person that you are now?
Well, like I said, I think it's those relationships, so for me, that because I was involved in those social activities, that those were huge, important building blocks for me, because I was around people that were mentors, informal, kind of invisible mentors, if you will. And then I had some like teachers that maybe had more of that active role. And so I, was around a lot of that and just kind of taking it all in. And so I know for me, it was important to be around people that saw me. But what I also, and I now when I think about it, I think this is something that really made a difference, is having people around me that were very diverse. My peer groups were very diverse, and my teachers, for the most part, were pretty diverse. Not necessarily always Spanish speaking, because I was the kid that I'd have to translate at my own parent-teacher conferences. And then, they'd say, are you really translating what I'm saying? I'm like, yeah, of course I'm translating, because my mom, how would she know what they're really saying? But their backgrounds were diverse and their experiences had been diverse. And I that to me really shaped my world, because not a lot of places are like the demographic makeup of what we have in San Diego.
Yes.
And there's places that are much more diverse and places that are not as diverse. And so the area that I grew up, we had a blend, and I was always in classrooms where students, we just had a blend of ethnicities and diversity. And so that has always made me I'm comfortable being around people that look different, because I've always had that. It's not a big deal. I had friends where I'm like, oh yeah, I got to explore different types of food, because with my Filipino friends, their moms would make pancit and lumpia, and that's really good, greasy, but really good food, right? And then, with my African-American friends, I learned about hair. I didn't know anything about African-American hair. I thought, I don't really know, your hair texture is different than mine, but they'd be like, oh, okay, well, here's what we do. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so it just made it comfortable to ask questions. I don't freak out when people are, exploring diversity topics, and, sometimes the race conversation can get deep. But for me, I know that was a huge building block, is that I've always been around people that are different and like me. And so I know in college, I didn't necessarily see as much as that diversity. That actually stood out to me, because I realized, oh, this isn't, and even though San Diego State's a pretty diverse university, when I attended, I realized, but that they didn't all come with my type of background. And so I thought, oh, this is different. The students here had way different experiences than I did. A lot of them maybe that were not first generation. So that was different. But I think that's a huge building block for myself that's been very enriching, because some people are only, or maybe have only had that experience of growing up with everybody that looks very similar to them, or has a very similar background. I think actually that's not, I have friends that are pretty much every different ethnicity, because that was the makeup of our school.
Yeah.
So that was our norm. So when I have met other folks and had conversations, they're like, oh, I don't really have, I don't have gay friends, or I don't have Black friends. And I think, where are you living? Like, where do you hang out? Like, are you in a bubble? But I realize some people just, not that they run away from the diversity, but they just haven't been as exposed to it maybe as other people. And that just, for whatever reason, it was, when I think back, especially like to middle school and high school, although, there are huge pockets of large, predominantly Latino students where I grew up, in the classes where I was and in the sports that I played, I mean, we had a blend, and that's been a real treat. And I think it has really just helped shape my world, but not everybody has that experience. And so I think we're seeing, right, a lot of that maybe now. So that was those building blocks for me, to answer your question, would be the relationship piece, and then having that exposure to diversity at an early age. I learned stories and struggles from people that are similar yet different, and that's always been helpful in understanding how we click with other people. So maybe that's where my love of travel comes too, because I love going around the world and just trying new customs and new foods, and I just think that's just really cool to just see different amazing places, and these vast different stories that people have. I think that's it's just so enriching to, and it's a privilege to be able to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, huge building blocks for myself, I would say, that have made an impact for sure.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And I think about like my family. I would say within my family, there wasn't diversity in the sense that we kind of stayed with everybody. There wasn't like, we never even went to San Diego, and it's hard to explain to anybody San Diego is so large that when we live in like the south of San Diego, going to San Diego is probably about 20 minutes, I would think. And so when I was growing up, my mom was like, no, why would you go to San Diego? It's too far. So I had no real diversity, like in that regards. The diversity that I experienced was in school.
Mm.
So if you think about even like when we talk about segregation and we talk about, being able to have diverse viewpoints, like school is there. That's it. For some students, they won't have a diverse range of experiences unless they're in school. And I don't think even in education right now, we talk about systems. I'm a systems thinker. I'm doing, no, you're really not. It's like closed. It really is. It's not an open system, a dynamic system. And the difference between those are that dynamic systems you can't predict. There's just so many variables. And I think we kind of understand that in an essence because of the counselor in us, that we've seen so many young people come in and we might say, okay, yeah, I know. I think that kid has some problems at home. And then you find out they really don't. There's some other variable that you have to like delve into to find. And that's what makes us so great as human beings, because we're not only able to have all of these vast experiences, we can share them with each other. And then we can actually like learn from it and analyze and reflect and then get better and grow. And I don't know if there's any other species on this planet that has the efficiency of doing that. But I wouldn't say we're being very efficient kind of in our old system. So then that kind of leads us in this last half hour segment. Like then as we're thinking about the future, for you, Gabby, like what does that look like? What do we need to be doing to get to a place where every child that's born is seen as this valuable bundle of potential that could solve the climate change problem, that could solve social problems, that could reinvent, businesses as we know them? Like, how do we get to that place? What do we need to do?
Well, that's a big question. And I would say, again, because we're functioning in a system that has been dysfunctional for quite some time. I don't think you can just abolish and, deconstruct a system overnight, although COVID is giving us a run for our money, right? Because in essence, it's saying everything you thought you could do, you now have to do it differently. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunity there to say, wow, well, it can be done differently. But those of us who are stuck in that traditional mindset where we can't get past those mental models of, but it has to be within these parameters. Well, if we could just erase the parameters, then what could it be, right? And so this idea of, well, how do we make school more experiential and engaging from the get-go, as opposed to expecting that teachers are going to be these content experts in all these different areas, and they're the only ones that have to carry this weight of being able to have students perform in X amount of core content areas, where I think, why do we do it that way? Why can't it be that there is a core day teacher, and then there's some experiential programming happening maybe with other staff members or a community provider or an agency that comes in? They are helping to help that student reach those academic benchmarks. Maybe they're not credentialed the same way a teacher would be in science or math, but they are definitely credentialed in being able to offer experiential activities and hands-on learning that's engaging. And I almost feel like if we could find a way, and that's really, the initial, I think, design behind out of school time and expanded learning programs, don't know that it's been able to function that way because it's set up to also function in this already established system, right? And it's about how do we get the system to bend a little bit and say, could you just have a little bit more flexibility and have it be where, there's support staff, community people coming in that are assisting alongside that core day teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes that entire school day, as opposed to maybe having it where it's, the 8 to 2:30 is, this rigorous content. Well, it can still be rigorous, but perhaps the learning is outside. Perhaps we're doing things outside in the community, and that is part of, how I learn better. And I know we have a lot of innovative schools that have developed in the last several years, charter schools that take on this model. You've worked out one.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that that's, to me, an ideal initial step is how can kids learn differently? And then how can we shape the school day so that the school day begins to also look different? If
Mm-hmm.
we want kids to have a different experience, but yet you keep plugging them into the exact same mold, it's not going to work, right? And so it's really, that's what I think is scary to some people, is you're talking about undoing things that have been in place for years, but it hasn't worked. So at what point are we going to say, we probably want to maybe try something else?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you continue to do this for yet another 100 years, we already know where that's going to end up. And it will be the students of color, the students who are low income, those who are in foster care, those who are experiencing homelessness, those who are migrant, those kids will continue to suffer because it hasn't been working.
Yeah.
And so if we could just say, go back to the drawing board, and maybe it's those pieces of how do they learn? How do we make it fun and engaging and creative, where it's not so structured in the sense of they have to be able to regurgitate information on an assessment. There's different ways perhaps that we can look at how they're learning, how they're growing. And maybe that also needs to carry some weight. So I don't by any means claim to have an answer to everything, but I think, well, perhaps if we just thought, I would, you have this idea of a farm school, right? And there's programs where the learning happens outside. Montessori schools are wonderful for doing that. It's kids have a whole different experience there. Mm-hmm. Learning itself is looked at differently. And so maybe that's where we would start. That would be an idea, is just maybe look at how we learn and what environment factors need to be in place to nurture the way that we're really designed to learn. It cannot possibly be with a book and you're looking at someone in front of the room. That cannot be it. There's just no way. There's no way. That didn't work for me. It hasn't worked for a lot of kids. It just has to be something different.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on where we would start?
Well, I mean, even what you just said about, I think there are a lot of young people learning experientially. Fortunately, that is kind of a hallmark of privilege, because some of those private schools are extremely experiential. Kids are cooking, they're gardening, they're doing, music and dance, and that's incorporated into the whole curriculum as a part of kind of that whole child idea. But I feel like we need to get down to the roots of what is learning. And that's, for me, that's kind of been my mission for the last 10 years or so, is, how did I get to where I am right now? I should be, an anomaly. I am an anomaly. I don't know. And so it's like, I started that question, how do we learn? Like, what is learning? And I think that's where we go back to the root of everything. We're always learning. We learn, we grow, regardless of school.
I'm jotting down your amazing ideas.
Oh. And
that's what I'm doing, in case you're curious.
No. A quick story is, I don't feel like most of the time I did learn in school, absolutely. But there was so much time outside where I was reading Greek mythology, and I was, reading voraciously. I was such a voracious reader. And I know some people aren't. My niece wasn't, and now she is. She didn't start really reading until 12. It was giving her the space to not do that, and not give her pressure to the point where she could really then say, I do want to read. So that's a key. But I spent the majority of my weekends at my grandfather's dairy farm that he was a caretaker on. And I went off into the mountains by myself. I was just this little girl, and I would run, and he would go, "Lisa, where are you going?" And I would say, "Oh, I'm going." I would spend hours just like pretending that I was the Kumeyaay, because we have beautiful granite rocks with remnants of that culture, and just, listening to the creek that was flowing at that time and trying to see if I could, pan for gold. And I really feel like that's where my whole sense of self was really fostered. So if you ask me like, well, that's not really learning, I would argue with you. And I think people, when I ask them, like, what is the experience that you remember about learning? A lot, and I should have asked you before I said that, but a lot of times they will say something that's not related to school. Often they say that it's something not related to school, whether it's, I was connecting with my grandmother and we were cooking for the first time, or so. What I would kind of do as a call to action for teachers, administrators, business people, is that we really are in a time where every single human being and the potential that they have to help create or innovate can't be lost. Some of the systems that we've developed, most of the systems I think we've developed, are really meant to say, I'm going to privilege one kind of, certain individuals, and then the other individuals, they don't get the privilege. And then we add on, it's because they're whatever. We don't have time for that anymore. And so I'm hoping that the future is, we've deconstructed, that we understand through science, through neuroscience, through all the amazing work in anthropology that shows our human roots, that we are so much more than we could have ever dreamed that we were, and that we cannot just waste these brilliant minds that are being born, and to be able to give them all of those opportunities and sensory experiences so that they can grow to emerge, to help sustain our whole society, at this point. And regardless if you don't believe in climate change or COVID or whatever your belief system is, it's not going to be a bad thing if we help, nurture the expertise of what that child was born to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
we're better for it.
We'll be better for it as a society. So yeah. That's my hope. And then the farm school, of course.
Of course. But what can people expect, Lisa, as we're wrapping up? What will Two Counselors and a Mic in our series? What are some of the topics that some of our listeners can expect to chime in?
Thank you, Gabby. Our hope with this podcast is that we are kind of role modeling some dialogue that we hope that people can have in general about how they're experiencing their lives, and this idea of provenance, of where they've come from, where there's no judgment. It's just reflecting on the experiences and the diversity of experiences that we've all had. And we will, on our next podcast episode, be featuring Michael Paredes, who is the wonderful principal at Monarch School in San Diego, which is focused on helping homeless students and their families learn. And so he's a crazy guy, and he'll be our real mic. So we'll be two counselors and a real mic. But our hope is that we encourage anybody who'd like to reach out to us, and we will provide the information in the notes and comments for the podcast when we upload it. You can get in touch with us if you're interested in sharing your story, whether you're first gen, whether you feel like diversity really impacted your trajectory. If you want to talk about how we can deconstruct learning, frameworks, building frameworks for what that might look like in the future. We're really opening this up to anybody, but you do have to join us and do a little self-discovery and share about where you came from and what your passions are and why it's important for you to have these dialogues now, particularly for our young people, because that's why ultimately Gabby and I are doing this, so that we can kind of open the veil and say that, our children and our teens are not some crazy different individuals that we don't know, that we're all just human. We're in this one big boat called the earth, and we're trying our best to be the best people that we can be.
Yeah. And if I could add to that,
Absolutely.
so that, people that will hopefully be listening can know that we come from this place of humility, and that we don't have it all figured out. And I think sometimes people think, oh, they have, these positions of where they're facilitating programs and they've been in this field, and I think, yeah, that doesn't mean we have it figured out. You could, really, like, we are all really, I hate to use that phrase because now it's just everywhere, the in this together phrase. Like, for those of us in expanded learning, those of us in student services, those of us maybe in social work, those of us who are providing direct support to kids, we'd like to think we have it all figured out, but then something new comes our way. And so this podcast presents one additional avenue that might be easier, as maybe you're prepping dinner, or working on some scrapbooking, or whatever self-care you've got going on. But it's just a place, I think, for all of us too, to just be supportive of one another and realize, yeah, we don't always have the answers. And that's what this is about, is just being real and saying, hey, I want to learn from you, and maybe you can learn from me. And I think it just starts there, especially with the climate we're in. Again, going back to that place of we're wanting to provide a space for people to just connect. And, again, coming from a place of there's no judgment, and it's just really, we're just trying to just do our own part in our own little place of the world to just offer connection, and letting people know you really are not the only one that has probably had these questions or thoughts or frustrations or concerns in the education field. You're not alone in feeling that way. So we want to create that space. So
I love that. The first complex systems female scientist, Margaret Mead, said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So we're hoping we can be that small group of committed citizens. Come join us in this podcast, and we'll see what emerges.
Thank you all for listening.